Imagine a major tech hub, right? The absolute engine of a trillion-dollar economy just brought to a complete standstill.
And we aren't talking about, like, a sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attack here.
Exactly. Not a cyber attack, not a global financial collapse. Just 3 days of heavy rain. The servers are perfectly safe, but the people who actually run them, they are trapped in their home.
Right, which means the global supply chains routing through that city just completely freeze up.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, the old 2005 disaster laws essentially treated that exact scenario as an unpredictable act of God. But a new piece of legislation introduced this year says something entirely different.
It says that kind of systemic paralysis is actually a failure of local management.
It does. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. We are taking a really hard look at the Disaster Management Amendment Bill, which was introduced in Parliament on August 1st, 2024. Think of the 2005 Act as the country's basic hardware, while this 2024 amendment is, well, it's an attempt to install a highly centralized, proactive operating system.
That is a perfect analogy. And, our mission today is to dissect this bill, not just for the raw facts, but to build a really high-scoring mental framework for you. We need to cover the policy provisions, the federal friction it creates, the national security implications, and ultimately the way forward.
Right, because this is an exam-focused war room briefing. We are looking for the analytical edge. So let's start with the background layer. Why did the government feel the absolute necessity to amend a law that's been, the backbone of our crisis response for nearly 2 decades?
Well, the structural problem they're trying to solve is that the 2005 Act was very reactive, like an emergency room. It only kicked into high gear after the damage was already done.
So the new bill is supposed to be preventative medicine.
Exactly. And
Right.
to do that, they are fundamentally changing the institutional architecture. First, they are taking the National Crisis Management Committee and the High-Level Committee,
Yeah.
which have actually been around since before 2005, and they are finally giving them statutory status.
Okay, giving them real legal teeth. What else?
They're also taking the responsibility for preparing disaster management plans away from executive committees. They're handing that power directly to the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, and the State Disaster Management Authority.
Yes, direct to the NDMA and SDMAs.
Yep. And on top of that, the bill mandates the creation of these massive, comprehensive national and state-level disaster databases. They are going to track assessments, fund allocations, expenditure, everything. Plus, the NDMA gets new regulatory powers and staffing autonomy, assuming they get central government approval.
Okay, let's unpack this. By shifting plan preparation directly to the NDMA and giving them staffing autonomy, are we actually streamlining crisis response or just creating a heavier bureaucratic top layer? I mean, when a neighborhood is rapidly flooding, does a heavier bureaucracy actually help anyone?
What's fascinating here is the government's underlying rationale. It sounds counterintuitive, but this is about shifting from reactive relief to proactive disaster risk reduction, or DRR. They are integrating DRR directly into the legal definition of disaster management.
Oh, so they are legally mandating risk reduction before the disaster even happens.
Right, and those databases are crucial for that. Currently, post-disaster funding relies on, like, localized assessments, bureaucrats literally walking around with clipboards weeks later. A central database means the central government can instantly see historical vulnerabilities. They can pre-deploy the exact amount of funds required before a cyclone even makes landfall.
Got it. Okay, so that covers the national level. Let's move to the government response framework and focus on the urban and local reality, because this is where the rubber meets the road, right? How does this actually affect our cities?
This is probably the biggest shift. The bill mandates the creation of urban disaster management authorities, UDMAs, specifically for state capitals and municipal corporations.
Bringing in municipal commissioners and district collectors?
Exactly. It brings all the local power players into one institutional fold. Because, a flood in a rural area is a tragedy, but a flood in a state capital, that halts the regional economy.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it also empowers states to create their own state disaster response forces, right? The SDRFs, mirroring the national force.
Yes, because waiting days for the National Disaster Response Force to airlift specialized teams costs lives. Empowering states to build dedicated SDRFs drops the response time from days to hours.
Right. Now let's talk about governance reform and penalties, because this is the anchor point for a lot of people. The introduction of Section 60A.
Ah, Section 60A.
Yeah, a penalty of up to Rs 10,000 for failing to comply with central or state directives aimed at reducing disaster impact. I mean, Rs 10,000. Is that really going to deter a multi-million-dollar real estate developer from, say, blocking a drainage canal?
Practically, no. Ours 10,000 is pocket change for a big developer.
Mm-hmm.
But analytically, you have to look at the legal precedent it sets. Section 60A establishes a legally binding mandate with a punitive mechanism. It creates the baseline that noncompliance is a punishable offense.
Okay, so it's a structural starting point. Let's synthesize this for the exam. Grab your notepads. Here is a quick 150-word answer structure if you get a direct question on the government response framework. For the intro, you just state, the 2024 amendment shifts the legislative focus to urban resilience. Keep it crisp.
Right, and for the three body arguments, you get the institutions. First, statutory backing to apex committees. Second, decentralization of response via the new UDMAs and SDRFs.
And the third argument is the proactive deterrence via Section 60A. Then, for the way ahead, you just emphasize the need to ensure these new bodies are adequately funded. Boom, maximum marks.
Exactly. Now let's push this into the significance analysis layer. Why does all of this matter beyond just, administrative reorganization?
Let's interlink it, because UDMAs aren't just about local floods.
No, they are fundamentally about protecting economic nerve centers. This is where you bring in the defense and strategic angle. A disaster in a tech capital doesn't just wet the streets, it disrupts global supply chains. It exposes cyber and infrastructural vulnerabilities.
Right, like if the power grid goes down in a major IT hub, that is a severe national security implication.
Exactly. And it ties directly to Admerhir Varat and Viksit Farat 2047. You simply cannot build a developed nation on highly vulnerable infrastructure. It also ties into ease of governance with the new databases.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, creating UDMAs and SDRFs is essentially building a civil defense perimeter around our economic engines.
That is exactly how you should phrase it in an essay. It's a civil defense perimeter.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the blind spots. We are talking about modernizing disaster response, yet heat waves aren't even included as a notified disaster. I mean, how is that possible in 2024?
This raises an important question about the reality check of this bill. The omission of heat waves is arguably the most glaring climate blind spot. Heat waves melt tarmac, buckle train tracks, and cause massive power grid failures.
Not to mention the human toll, so why leave them out?
Because when a disaster is officially notified, it legally unlocks massive state and national relief funds. By not notifying heat waves, the government essentially avoids the financial liability of compensating for all those labor disruptions and agricultural losses.
Wow, okay. And what about international agreements? Did they formally integrate the Sendai Framework or the Paris Agreement 2015 into the bill?
No, they didn't, which is another huge critique. The Sendai Framework is the global blueprint for disaster risk reduction, and leaving it out of the core legal text keeps the law kind of isolated from global best practices.
That's a huge miss. Now let's talk about the federal issues, because I know states are pushing back. The bill dilutes the specific usage guidelines for the National Disaster Response Fund, the NDRF.
Yeah, and that creates a lot of federal friction. By making the NDRF guidelines more vague, states are worried that disbursement of funds will become discretionary.
Meaning they'll become overly dependent on the center's political goodwill during a crisis. The chain of command might actually become more complicated instead of streamlined.
Exactly. And the resource constraints compound that at the local level. The bill mandates the creation of UDMAs, but it doesn't address local funding gaps. Municipalities are already broke.
Right, so they are mandating an authority without providing a dedicated budget.
Yes. And without funds, those UDMAs just become paper tigers. They look great on paper, but they can't afford a single water pump. And on top of all that, there's a massive ethical and legal concern. Disaster relief under this system is still treated as a moral obligation by the state, not a justiciable right.
Wait, explain the difference there for the listener.
If it's a justiciable right, you can legally compel the state in court to provide standardized relief. Because it's just a moral obligation, we see highly unequal relief across different states for the exact same level of destruction. It's basically postcode lottery for survivors.
That is a brutal reality. Okay, so we've mapped the flaws. Let's move to the way forward framework. How do we fix these implementation gaps and actually future-proof the system?
First, technology adoption. We need to heavily leverage ISRO and the Indian Meteorological Department for advanced early warning systems.
Oh, like using AI and remote sensing for predictive modeling.
Exactly. Feed decades of data into an AI so it can predict exactly which streets will flood 3 days before the cyclone hits. We also need governance reforms. The recommendation here is establishing a strict 72-hour critical response plan with a perfectly streamlined command structure.
bypassing the bureaucracy for the first 3 days.
Right. And you also need to integrate disaster risk reduction into all urban infrastructure planning natively. Finally, capacity building must focus on psychological rehabilitation for disaster survivors. It's a crucial but completely ignored facet of recovery.
You can't rebuild a resilient city if the population is fundamentally traumatized.
Exactly.
Okay, let's lock this down into a 250-word answer writing structure. For the context, you write, the August 2024 bill aims to upgrade the 2005 DM framework.
Then your dimensions paragraph, you break it into institutional, so the UDMAs and statutory committees, regulatory, which is Section 60A, and capacity, which is the SDRFs.
Perfect. Then you hit the challenges paragraph. You mention over-centralization, the omission of heat waves and climate agreements, and the unfunded local mandates, the paper tigers.
And your recommendations paragraph should highlight ISRO and AI integration, the 72-hour response plans, and making relief a justiciable right.
Finally, your conclusion. True resilience requires the decentralization of resources, not just responsibilities. Boom. That is a top-tier answer.
It absolutely is.
All right, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's hit our final revision capsule to make sure this all sticks. Give me the 5 must-remember facts.
Okay, rapid fire. 1, introduced August 1st, 2024. 2, establishes UDMAs. 3, Section 60A allows a RS 10,000 penalty. 4, the NCMC and high-level committee finally get statutory status. And 5, it empowers the creation of SDRFs.
Excellent. And here is your one probable exam question to practice. Critically evaluate the Disaster Management Amendment Bill 2024. Does the centralization of regulatory powers undermine the operational efficiency of local disaster management authorities?
That's a great question. And if you answer that, make sure to use these 5 analytical keywords: disaster risk reduction, or DRR, urban disaster management authorities; justiciable, right, federal friction; and the Sendai framework.
Perfect. Give us a 30-second last-minute summary.
All right, here it is. The 2024 bill modernizes our crisis architecture by finally recognizing urban vulnerabilities and emphasizing risk reduction. But it risks creating federal bottlenecks, it creates unfunded mandates, and it completely ignores pressing climate realities like extreme heat waves.
Brilliantly summarized. So what does this all mean for you? Next time you see a city flood or you're stuck in an extreme heat wave, ask yourself, are our laws actually adapting to the climate, or are we just rearranging the bureaucratic furniture while the house is on fire? And beyond that, as extreme weather accelerates and coastal areas become uninhabitable, how are these newly minted, unfunded urban authorities going to handle the millions of climate refugees migrating to their struggling cities? That's a crisis no database can solve yet. Keep analyzing, keep interlinking. We will catch you on the next deep dive.